Welcome back to Where You Live with Gene and Tony. This has been a great show today.
It's been very fun. We've talked about animals a lot. We've talked to professionals in our field a lot. It's been very, very informative.
Yes,
and fun.
And it doesn't even stop there. We've got more. That's right. Folks, we are broadcasting from the Concierge Landscape Studios. We're brought to you this hour by Extreme Exteriors. Before we get into our next talk or story here, out of Florida, we're going to be dealing with a story where home builders are pushing for legislation that would free them from responsibility in repairs to HOAs. And we're going to be talking to attorney John Eden of Levin and Eden. He deals with these kinds of issues.
Warranty issues
all the time. But before we do, I'd like to just remind our listeners, we've got a free resource for you. It is a bi-monthly newsletter called What's New. A lot of what we talk about on the show is covered in further detail. It's yours free for the asking. Give us a call at 952-922-2500. Ask for Courtney. She'll make sure that you start receiving your subscription. And don't forget, one of the first things you want to do is take a look at the free webinars. We have one coming up next Wednesday evening. You can log on free at the comfort of your home in relation to what we just talked about in our last two segments. The title of the webinar, Association Politics, the Art of Dealing with Difficult People. In that webinar, you're going to learn how to deal with some of the most obnoxious, unruly behavior you could ever think of dealing with in an association, be it someone on the board or a member themselves. But someone who's not obnoxious, but someone we always really appreciate
and rely on,
is our next guest. Folks, we want to welcome to the Where You Live phones, attorney John Eden. Hi, John.
Hi, Gene. Hi, Tony.
Hi, John. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on again.
Well, I'm glad you could be with us here to weigh in on this story. And folks, and for our listeners here, this is coming out of Florida from the Orlando Sentinel. And it says that there are home builders who are pushing legislation that would free them from their responsibilities. In a nutshell, what took place, and they're given a specific example here in this story, the homeowners in the Miranda Lakeview Reserve sued their builder over pitted streets and drainage problems. And what happened was the lower court determined that the common areas were not the builder's problem, but that decision was overturned on appeal and is now in the hands of the Florida Supreme Court, and they're expected to rule on it in the next coming months. But in the meantime, it seems that home builders kind of put together their own lobbyist group and have gone to several state legislators and have asked them to sponsor a bill that would protect builders in Florida from being responsible for defects in a subdivision's common area. They're saying that the result would be that homeowners would have to pick up the tab in the case of the problems in Lakeview Reserve. The 159 homeowners would be assessed $3,800 per home for re-engineering and repair problems in their association. John, what do you think of this legislation?
Well, I'm not very impressed with it from a consumer standpoint. I'm thankful that Minnesota is a consumer. It has a reputation anyway as a consumer protection state, and that we have some pretty solid warranties under statute and in common law that protect unsophisticated owners from the professionals that build their buildings and potentially do things wrong. We see this type of thing, or we hear about it around the country, and I know that the headline of the article is that it's about street repairs, and now it's morphed into no responsibility for common elements at all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, and it's kind of another one of these tail wagging the dog situations, and perhaps the political climate has changed in Florida, and it has elsewhere as well. And it reminds me a lot of the tort reform medical malpractice discussion that was kind of a national issue a number of years ago. And when an outlandish case comes to light, like the coffee spilled on the woman with the McDonald's coffee.
Yeah,
sure.
And we don't know a lot about that case, but when people initially hear about it, it's, oh my gosh, how can this be? And I think those things get blown into characterized as wider and having more impact than they do.
Oh, interesting. How would you compare Minnesota, the status in Minnesota for warranty repairs on common areas, to what they seem to be trying to do in Florida?
Yeah, most states have adopted some version of the Uniform Condominium Act, and in Minnesota it's the MCIWA, Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, and there's warranties that are set forth in that statute. But in any state that I've looked at, and we practice in several, there's always statutes of limitation. You have to take action within a certain period of time, or that claim is barred.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you something specific to that, John, and that is, okay, we're talking about, yes, warranty, there are warranties in place, a set time period. Let me ask the question, do you generally think that the time periods that have been established for warranty issues on buildings, do you think that that the period of time is sufficient for someone to be able to find something out if it is defective?
I think that the short answer is no. My experience is that I have a lot of cases that I deal with where homeowners have thought they've dealt with issues that are typically maintenance oriented, perhaps a roof leak through a vent stack or isolated ice dam or something like that, and they don't think, oh gosh, I've got to go sue the developer now.
Right.
This is something we'll fix, and these things happen, especially in bigger projects over a period of years. You could have 30, 40 examples of this, and then finally something really major happens, and they come to me and they say, do we have a claim? And we hire an engineer and do an investigation and determine objectively that there's a really widespread problem.
That stemmed back to the original development.
Right, to the original construction, and then the defense attorneys typically bring those statute of limitations motion. You knew about that leak back then, and therefore you should have done something. In Minnesota, that period of time is only 2 years from when you knew or should have known of a problem. You have to actually bring your lawsuit in a negligence case. And in the case of the MCIWA statute, that's a 6-year time period, but it's not from when you knew of anything. It's just from either in a planned community from the date of sale or in a condominium from the transition date.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's also a provision in that statute that 6 years can be shortened to 2. And that was a pretty a nice insertion, I'm sure, by certain lobbyists.
Well,
for the developers.
let me ask you how do you address that then? Because from the standpoint, I can also see someone doesn't want to just be held out in limbo for a number of years, not knowing whether or not something can take place. How do you think something like this can be addressed, can be written, so that there's enough time? I think you want to give enough time for the person to have discovery, but not enough time for the person to drag their feet.
Right, and in any building situation, defects are often hard to discover, and it takes a long time for them to leach out of. Perhaps like a flashing detail in a window, you're not going to know that for 5 or 6 years until you see some more exterior signs of that. So I think you need enough of a period of time to be able to discover those things, and that puts some burden on homeowners associations to do their due diligence, hire an inspector perhaps when their warranties are about to expire. But the thing that protects the builder on the back end is two things. One is you have to take action appropriately to preserve your rights, and there's something called a statute of repose in Minnesota, which under any theory of liability, if you discover something after the 10th year from the date of substantial completion, there are no more claims that can be made.
Okay.
And so, you hear those anecdotal stories. Gene, you and I were talking earlier about a major national builder who they step up to the plate and pay some money 10, 12, 13 years after original construction. That's because they're doing that out of the goodness of their heart. It's not because there's a legal liability there.
Just for our listeners, it was we bash a lot of builders and that sometimes, but I've got to give kudos, and unfortunately, it's to a corporation that's no longer around anymore, and that was Centex. Years ago, there was a property we managed. We had a rain that was not only over a 100-year event, it was over a 500-year event, washed out the roads in this townhome.
I remember this.
And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. It was certainly beyond the time limit that the builder had any responsibility whatsoever. But to their credit, they came in and they offered to pay half of that. The association paid the other half. Yeah. I was amazed. I said, you know what? There's still good folk out there, and I just thought that was a classy thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard examples, and I experience examples of that all the time, and I certainly think that homeowners associations and builders can work together. But, there are protections built into the system to prevent abuse. And, in this Florida story, I think that they're raising the specter of, oh, my gosh, who knows how long I might be dragged back to deal with this particular issue. And I bet you, $10 that I don't have Romney's 100,000 to bet. But, I bet $10 that Florida has a statute of repose. That's what we have too. In 10 years you can't bring a claim.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if it was just an open-ended thing down there.
Hey, we need to take one more break, but we've got one segment left in today's show. Can you stay over for that segment, John?
I sure can.
Great. Folks, we're talking to Attorney John Eden. We're talking about what's taking place in Florida with some legislation that might give more leeway for builders in not having responsibility with their buildings after they're finished. We'll talk with him more about this after these messages.